Hello, this is Matthew Chan of extortionletterinfo.com, and I'm happy to be bringing you this update on February 23rd. And I have a very special guest today. My special guest is Jonathan Bailey from Plagiarism Today, and I'm especially excited about having him as a guest because for the very first time ever, I've brought in a guest that has very little to do with ELI, and yet surprisingly, as you're going to find out, we actually have a lot in common and we have similar points of view. Now, I'm not going to take away from what Jonathan's going to say, so I'm just going to basically just jump right on in and let him tell you how he sees things from his point of view. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to this. I'm interested in an engaged dialogue, and I'm hoping that's exactly what comes from this. To give a little background on me, real fast, I work full-time as a copyright and plagiarism consultant. I am definitely a pro-copyright guy. I make no bones about that. I believe artists and creators and people that put the time, energy, and expense into making works deserve at least a decent element of control and a good opportunity to earn a living from those works. I'm against piracy. I may not be the most radical of the pro-copyright out there. I consider myself on most issues a centrist, but I am definitely, not an unabashed copyright supporter. But the other side of the coin is, largely it's because of where I come from. I didn't ask to be a copyright and plagiarism consultant, much like you didn't ask to, be called into doing extortion letter info, from what I recall. We both were drafted into our various professions, if you will.
Exactly.
I was a author and a poet, short story author, essayist, and all that. I was online. I've been posting my stuff online since 1995. And in and around 2000, I discovered that my work was being plagiarized, and at that time that seemed absolutely crazy to me. Why would anyone plagiarize my stuff? It's not even that good. Why take it and put your name to it? Total waste of effort. But yet at the same time, this was something very personal, very dear to me, and it cheesed me off a little bit. Let's be honest. I got really mad about it. I came from a journalism background. I'd studied copyright law because, that's one thing about being a journalist is you oftentimes get more copyright law information in journalism school than you would in law school. They sit us down. It's a year-long course about law and ethics in journalism. And you sit there, the cadre old professor, and tells you the ins and outs of copyright law and how, not just, don't screw up. I remember him telling that repeatedly. And a lot of that law was geared toward keeping you out of trouble rather than how to protect your work. But still, you learn a great deal about the law. So I knew I had rights, but I was completely clueless on how to enforce them. The practical, how do I go from knowing these are my rights to enforcing them online? Very difficult question. And it was a lot of trial and error for me. I had to learn. I had to become kind of an armchair lawyer a little bit. I'm not an attorney. I don't have any desire to be an attorney. I love attorneys. Many of them are my best friends. I say that like I'm somehow trying to cover up something. Really, I do have a lot of attorney friends. But the point is, I'm not one myself, but I studied the law very intensely. And in and around 2005, actually it was August 2005, I started Plagiarism Today because I realized that this idea of dealing with copyright was becoming a bigger and bigger part of my life. And I wanted to, at that time I was getting into blog reading and RSS reading. Google Reader was still fairly new and stuff like that. And I was very fascinated by this idea of getting all the Internet's information directly into your brain. It was really exciting stuff for me. And I wanted a good blog on these copyright issues, a practical, down-to-earth, this is how you enforce your work on the Internet copyright blog. I searched for 3 days and didn't find it. Right. So I said, well, maybe I should try my hand at it, see how it goes. The site launched August 2005. The date's important because, as you might know, I'm from New Orleans, and as you might know, we had a little bad weather right around then.
Yeah.
So it was a spot of trouble. It blew over pretty quickly. We had a little bit of rough weather, and so I remember being evacuated from Hurricane Katrina, working on this site obsessively, keeping me sane while I was worrying about my house, my future, everything else. And then it sort of grew from there, and now I started working in copyright and plagiarism in full-time about 2007, and really haven't looked back. It's been a very rewarding profession.
Well, I didn't even realize now when you just retold your story, that you started this in 2005. So you've been at this for like 7 good years now. I mean,
yeah, it'll be 7 years come August.
Okay. Now, what's interesting to me is that how we discovered each other, and you decided to write this article. Tell us about this article that you wrote about us. Or not us specifically, but it's entitled Stock Photo Industry's Massive Copyright Campaign. How did that come across your desk? And what made you decide to look into it? And, of course, ultimately, how did you even find us?
Well, I mean, I've been following the Getty Images campaign for quite some time. I mean, it's been one of those things that would blip up on the radar from time to time. Usually every time Getty would send out a blast, there would be another news article here or something there. And it was one of those things that kept percolating on my radar. And I kept following it and trying to understand it and understood the absolute sheer size of what was going on. And it was really amusing because the article was actually published, and got the date here. It was July 21st, 2010, when the actual article was published.
Almost 2 years ago.
At that time, there was mad publicity on the RAAA's litigation campaign, which had already stopped by that point. BitTorrent lawsuits, MPAA lawsuits, all of this stuff, all the stuff dealing with copyright infringement. And I'm like, wait a minute. The lion's share of legal threats belong to the stock photo industry. They've been by far the most active if you're just counting heads in terms of letters sent out, and threats made and probably dollars obtained from the settlements. The stock photo industry is light years beyond the movie studios and the record labels. They've gone way above and beyond. So I kind of wanted to talk about it because, just running the numbers, admittedly back of the envelope math, because you can't get the full numbers from Getty. They're, don't talk about that.
That's very true.
Hush on those issues. So back of the envelope math, admittedly, but it was many, many times bigger. And frankly, I've never been fond of the campaign. It's been a style of copyright enforcement I have not approved of, and a style of copyright enforcement I wanted to shine a light into. Because that's the thing that really threw me off was they've sent thousands and thousands of these letters, and virtually no media mention. Like I said, an article here, a mention there, no one really drawing any real attention to it. It's like, well, someone's got to actually talk about this, put this in the open. And of course, you'd been running ELI by that point for quite some time. And so I knew that, you were going to get mentioned and we were going to bump into each other through that. But, I've been following ELI for some time before that with interest to see, what was going on in the campaigns, how the tactics were shifting. And also I got a lot of great information from the article from your site in terms of about the volume of it and how it was working, average settlements, etc. A great resource of information for it. And as a journalist, I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for visiting us.
Great resource there. But no, that's the reason I decided to write about it, and that's, like you said, how we first kind of came into significant contact, if you will.
Yeah, and we've been trying to get connected over the video since last year. I mean, just for our audience members who don't know the story.
It's all been technical difficulties, though. Really, we just now figured out this Ubu thing. Really, it's not that simple as it looks. It took a whole year.
Well, yeah. Well, let's be very nice about it. A lot of it had to do with me putting you off. And you finally followed up so many times that you guilted me into it. So we finally had to get this thing together. I just got tired of putting you off. So there you go. Nothing like a little guilt.
It's an effective strategy. Annoy them.
Yeah, it works really very well. Well, okay. So you wrote this article. Can you specifically tell me which part of the campaign that rubs you the wrong way? Because you are an advocate of defending copyrights, and you certainly you've told me about what you do with DMCAs as well as cease and desist letters. What is it about the Getty Images that crosses a line as far as you're concerned?
Well, with me, the issue I have with the Getty Images is they have clearly tried to turn copyright enforcement into a profit center unto itself.
Oh,
and that bugs me. Because my view of copyright is this, is that copyright is designed to enable business models. It's designed to enable you to sell CDs, to print DVDs, to sell tracks on iTunes, to become a stock photo source if you wish. It's not meant to be the business model unto itself. And the settlement amounts Getty throws out, usually it averages around $1,000 an image, if I'm still correct on that. That was the last information I had.
Yes.
That is a very, very strategic amount. It is painfully well planned because it is many, many, many times the value of the image, even with reasonable damages affixed. It's many times what I would consider to be a reasonable amount for it. But at the same time, it is still way, way cheaper than hiring an attorney to fight. I mean, I know you do a lot of great work with attorneys on your site, but the bottom line is, if you walked into just a copyright attorney in your city somewhere, just walked in the front door and said, hey, I got this letter, want you to defend me, you'd be looking at about a $5,000 retainer from day one, and that's if the lawsuit's quickly resolved, that retainer would cover it. And it's not likely it would if Getty really pressed it and required a lot of letters and so forth. So they know going into this that this is much more than the image itself is actually worth as a practical product. And also at the same time, it's much less than it would cost to defend it. So people that are hit with these letters often feel like they're stuck in having to pay the settlement fees.
Well, let me play a devil's advocate, okay? It's not often that I get to do that. Okay, so I'm going to be getting images, and you're going to respond to me. So, well, the reason why we have to do this is because we have to cover our costs. That's why it costs $1,000. Do you buy into that?
If you were paying someone $1,000 to send you a letter, hire me. I can get it done for about 1/10 of that easily. I mean, I understand that there are costs in sending these letters and doing this campaign. I understand that. But I also cannot imagine that this is the cost unless you are literally going the most expensive way possible to do this. I have done similar letter sending campaigns. And we were not doing like these demand letters. We were sending letters in an attempt to get customers. We'll talk more about that later. It did not cost anywhere near $1,000 an image to do that. I know the numbers of what it takes to send it, and believe me, $1,000 an image. If I had gotten $1,000 for every letter I sent, you know, you'd be seeing me in my bling bling mansion right now.
Well, but the fact of the matter is,
I wouldn't be in this tiny studio.
However, a lot of people don't pay, so we have to inflate it to subsidize those that don't pay. What do you think about that? Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of people don't pay as well.
That's true. And part of that actually, that's a two-part problem, and some of it's not actually Getty's fault. To be completely fair to Getty, copyright law in this country is ridiculous in terms of how you enforce it in the courts. Copyright law requires you to go through a federal court to file a lawsuit, and basically if you wanted to file a copyright lawsuit, then going back to what I said, $5,000 to defend, if you want to be on the other side and go on the attack, you're probably looking at $10,000 to $20,000 just to file the suit. One proposal that's being kicked around right now that I think would help alleviate this is what's called a copyright small claims court, where people can file these claims for sub $1,000 or $5,000, whatever, and have those cases heard quickly and cheaply and effectively outside of federal court. And so that's one of the problems that Getty has, is that you're right, not everyone pays, many don't. And so they have to inflate. But the point is, if you're trying to make money from this, and the thing is, I still can't believe, because $1,000 for an image, sending a letter should not cost more than, say, $25. So even if you have a 90% not paying rate, you're still making an insane amount of money off this letter campaign. You only need 1 out of every 50 or 1 out of every 100. I'm pretty sure there are settlement rates much higher than that. I'd be surprised if it's in like single-digit percentages. You know, I mean, that would be quite shocking to me. Well,
okay, let me give you another devil's advocate question. One of their things that they say is that, cease and desist letters don't work. They will ignore it. So unless we threaten to sue them and collect money through the settlement demand letter, the cease and desist letters just don't work. What's your reply to that? Since you've actually done it.
Cease and desist letters do actually work very well, I might add. In my experience, they've worked exceptionally well.
Why do they work?
But on the other side of the coin is, even if they don't, you still have other solutions. You have DMCA takedown notices, which can get these images removed from web. Though you send those to the host, host will comply with them more. If it's a U.S.-based host, they will comply more than 97, 98% of the time. It's a very reliable process to get those images cheaply and quickly removed from the Internet. It's not a major headache. I've filed thousands of those over the years and can attest to their success. And also, like I said, cease and desist, I think, can be very effective. A lot of it, though, is how you present it. If you present it if you threaten people and scare them, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's kind of psychological. The more you scare people, the more you threaten people and go after them, the less likely they are to kind of ignore. They're more likely to turtle up and, defend them and hide from it. But if you approach people with a little bit of warmth and say, hey, look, this image is on your site. We know you probably didn't mean it. Look, just take it down, all right? Seriously, before we have to consider doing something else. Just want to be a good guy and give you a warning. Usually that generates a response. A lot of it's in the tone. And it seems to me a lot of people that complain about the ineffective of cease and desist are usually the ones coming off, punching them in the face with legalese and threatening them and trying to, not resolve something amicably.
Well, let me ask you this. What about the claim about damages? Well, you already got use out of the image. You deprived us of income. So we're entitled to receive some monies because of the damages as a result of our lost income. And the cease and desist, and cease and desist doesn't cover that. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. And I would agree that damages are probably worthwhile. And this goes back to that small claims court. It'd be nice to be able to effectively sue someone for a couple $100 worth of damages. It's just not effective in the current climate. You can't realistically do that. And hopefully that will change. But the flip side of the coin is that under the current system, damages are very, very difficult to collect. And it's sort of a reality check here because, yes, I do think you deserve damages, but one's ability to collect them and reliably without engaging in, sort of unscrupulous tactics is much more dubious. And a lot of that has to be the law has to change and the law has to catch up with the Internet. So I do sympathize with Getty on those issues. But as far as, collecting damages go, I agree they deserve them. But I think they should be more realistic in terms of the proportion of the use gotten and the value of the image. I mean, I think it's kind of unreasonable to sell an image for a few dollars and then claim $1,000 worth of damage because it was on their site for a month.
Right.
That seems a little bit disproportionate to me. And also, it's just you kind of have to be realistic about it. You can't claim damages on every case. I think it's much more important that you deprive the use of it as quickly as you can, and that way you can hopefully nudge people into becoming legitimate customers and bring them into the fold of your actual business, which is supposedly selling stock photos and not threatening people with lawsuits.
Right. Well, now that you mentioned earlier that you studied a variety of cases, that you brought up RIAA for one, and some of the other, and what did you say, MPAA? And so this is the deal. The stock photo industry as a whole, they issue a lot of letters, they issue a lot of threats, where they're among the least litigious. What do you think about that?
And I would agree with that. And part of that is because of the different targets.
Okay.
The RIAA, the BitTorrent lawsuits, even to a degree Righthaven and so forth, their targets were primarily businesses. I mean, they were primarily individuals. You, me, Johnny McGee, individuals, and they had limited income, but also you probably didn't have that address. And one of the reasons why you see all these lawsuits, because you got to understand how the BitTorrent lawsuits work, is a good example of this. Say, any of the various BitTorrent lawsuits, BitTorrent agencies out there, they file a lawsuit. They don't file a lawsuit to the person. They file a lawsuit against a John Doe and get that with an IP address.
That's right.
And so what they're doing is they're filing the lawsuit and they're hoping to get the judge to order the ISP to in turn turn over that data so that way they can convert that little IP address into a human name, phone number, address, email, birth certificate, hairstyle, shoe size, average income, any other information they can get out of it. That's what they're trying to do. So they file the lawsuit to turn that IP address into a human being, if you will. And when that happens, when they get that information, they drop the lawsuit. Lawsuit's done. They're not pushing it any further. They got what they wanted. And then it kicks into something very similar to what we see with Getty, which is where they send out those letters, hundreds, if not thousands of letters at a time. They shoot them out. and send them to everyone. And then from that point on, once that lawsuit's dropped, it functions very similarly to Getty. And they only pick up and file actual suits against the ones that don't respond or respond poorly, if you will, to the first round of letters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's good.
And then with Getty, since they target mostly businesses, they already have that information, that address, that phone number. It's on the site. If a dentist office uses a stock photo incorrectly, you already know the name of the person, you know the address of it, you know the LLC name, you got all the information you need. There's no reason to file a suit.
Well, that's true. You can also look at the domain name records too. So there are, and that's one of the things I say to people who are trying to be anonymous. I mean, by and large, a lot of businesses it's very hard to be completely anonymous. Now, guys like you and I mean, we are part of our business. I mean, it's very hard to hide ourselves. I mean, if we hid ourselves, we would sort of deprive the most of our income. So, we're part of the product here. So given this whole situation, of course, we're not going to be able to cover all this in this one particular introductory episode, Jonathan.
No, of course not.
What is the takeaway for our people at this juncture regarding your views? I mean, you've already taken the position that you feel like that where they've crossed the line is the whole revenue model they've made it. It is not just a deterrent. Mm-hmm. They're not just trying to recoup damages. They're going way beyond.
They're not just trying to recoup damages, and they're not just trying to do parity with, how much the actual other person actually gained from it. They're actually trying to make this a revenue generator,
And you have a real problem with this.
Yeah, I do.
Now, how has other people now, because you're typically on the other side, you have clients that are on the quote underside. What do they feel about your opinions on this? How does that affect your business and people's perception of you that you disagree with some of these tactics? In fact, I mean, you sort of alluded to the fact that some people have approached you. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah,
you don't have to give away any confidential information. Right?
Well, I had one client. And this is an interesting example. In fact, this was how ELI actually helped me make my argument. They were approaching me to do, in fact, they were actually inspired by Getty. They were wanting to do a very similar letter campaign for their content. And they were not in the stock photo business. They did turnkey websites. And since there's like 10,000 companies that do that, I'm not giving away anything, I don't think. But they were doing those turnkey websites where they produce all the content and the design and everything. You just kind of slap your name on it, and you've got a website to give to, your customers. Right. One of those deals. And, of course, other sites were ripping off the content. It was inevitable. It was going to happen. And I agreed it was a problem. But they wanted to do a Getty-style letter-writing campaign. And I said, no, wait a minute. Go to ELI.com, and you'll see the kind of negative publicity you get. You'll see what you pay for. Yes, you can turn it into a revenue model, but you're going to be ticking off potential customers, and you're going to be earning yourself a very bad reputation in this industry. And this is a very close-knit industry they were in. And so I proposed a different strategy. I said, let's just try an experiment. You can fire me if I fail, type thing. But let's try an experiment. Let's do the letter right. But rather than demanding X $1,000 per, whatever, let's just say, okay, very tepid, very timid, very mild, cease and desist letter, but say, hey, if you want to continue using the content, here's where you can sign up and use our service. And you can get this and all this other great content included in the package. And we ran the numbers, and it was a good business model for these guys. It might not be so good for Getty because the amount of money you make per customer varies, so that changes. Mm-hmm. But for our case, it made a lot of sense because these guys were more valuable as customers by several $1,000s than they would ever be as a settlement. And so we were able to bring on several customers a month and more than pay for the actual enforcement, not by, shaking people down for money, but by bringing them in as clients and then turning them into actual long-standing, happy customers. Everyone seemed to win, and it worked very well. And so, then one thing I preach when I do copyright enforcement work is I don't simply talk about, there's a big difference between what's right in the court of law and what's right in the court of public opinion.
That's true.
And when you're doing copyright enforcement, you have to play to both, and a lot of people forget this. because the court of public opinion can find you just as guilty and hurt you just as bad. And I try to keep people's head in the game on the PR side of it, and I try to remind clients that if you're going against a spammer, or if you're DMCAing some kind of competitor that just scraped all your marketing content, by all means, go kick some butt. Go give them what's for. I'm all for that. I will help you. I've got the notices. I'm ready. Let's kick some butt.
Right.
But if you're going against people that may have accidentally done it, if you haven't established bad faith, and if it's a relatively minor infringement, having a sort of an unbalanced approach to it can cause the court of public opinion to turn against you in a great way, even if the court of law is on your side, and that can hurt you in a lot of ways. I know a lot of people who avoid buying from Getty Images because of this campaign. So I try to keep my clients in a position where their content and their creativity is being enforced respectively, but at the same time they're not getting run into the ground by negative publicity. And you go through my history and my clients, I don't have anyone that's been raked over the coals for over-aggressive copyright enforcement.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. I think one of the arguments is that, and I think this is just a suspicion of mine, is they don't really care necessarily. They don't seem to care about the PR end of it, from what I can tell. And I don't think they're too worried about lost sales, because I think they think that the people getting the letters would never have been customers anyway. What are your thoughts on that?
And they may actually be right about the actual people getting the letters might not be customers. But then again, stock photography is something that micro stock like this, especially, if you go down to the micro stock side, it's something that's so cheap you might be able to convert a potential pirate into a customer. There might be a potential there. But the other side is this: bad publicity doesn't stop with the person who got the letter. They go to forums, they go to photography forums, they talk to other people, and they tell about how this letter is bankrupting their family, and they tell it to other people who might be active customers, it might be current customers, it might be potential customers. It could reach the ears of a guy who works for a major corporation and maybe planning a $100,000 buy. It's just it's a situation where you don't know who's going to hear this and what they're going to think of it. So you have to work hard to make sure that all your interactions, even these sort of uglier ones like copyright enforcement, are as positive as possible.
Right. Well, Jonathan, it's sort of interesting to me, as you were just speaking about the PR end of it, I don't recall us talking very much about it on the phone. And yet, it's sort of interesting how our minds are alike on that, because that's really one of the biggest reasons why I started ELI to begin with, was that no one was going to listen to. I mean, I know Getty Images or any other stock photo company would not listen to me as an individual, but if I launched a website and it got some visibility, I had a little bit more clout. And that's what it really came down to, fighting it on the PR end. And it didn't take long to figure out there was a lot of angry people out there. I mean, they're just anger will propel people to do all kinds of things. And it's interesting, my volunteers on the team, I mean, they're so passionate about it. There's just so much anger. They just donate their time to the cause. It's crazy. That's what happens when you piss people off. You get people working against you for free. They will even pay. And I was paying out of my own pocket and time for a number of years before I decided to start monetizing this. I said, well, gosh, I can't keep giving my time away. But it's crazy what anger will do. People will do all kinds of stuff.
If you were to send me a letter threatening me with a lawsuit if I didn't pay you $3,000 or something like that tomorrow, it would really, really tick me off. I mean, you're risking bankrupting my family. You're risking, everything for me. Because that's a lot of money to get hit with out of the blue. I mean, that's just flat out is for any average family. You're going to make people mad, even if they acknowledge they were infringing. They probably feel that the punishment was way worse than the crime, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And it was disproportionate. And part of that, like I said, is I do have some sympathy for Getty. They're working in a very inefficient copyright system that doesn't enable them to trivially file suits for small amounts. But some of it's just responsibility. It's social responsibility and trying to make sure that you keep balance in your approach. And that's where I think Getty has jumped the track, so to speak.
Well, great. Well, Jonathan, what we're going to do at this point is we're going to go ahead and end this particular introductory episode. I mean, really, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but we'll have to revisit it on the next episode or so. But do you have any parting words for our audience as we end this? I mean, I'm sure our audience members are grateful to have you on board, who's technically on the other side, and yet you fundamentally agree with us on so many areas. Anything you'd like to say?
Well, what I would like to say is one thing I don't want to have happen is that a lot of people see stuff like this and they get turned against the very idea of copyright and the very idea of, artists and creators being able to have control over the work. I'm encouraging people, yes, what Getty is doing, I think, is not perhaps the most ethical, perhaps not the best approach. But please don't let it discourage you from respecting copyright. Continue to be a good online citizen. Don't be one of those guys that says, screw the man, and goes out and pirates everything just because, they want to stick it to some invisible third party. Just remember that there are good guys on the other side, too, that there is a movement for balance, and there are people out there that do make a living from copyrighted works and do make a very meager living at times, but do still take a very rational and reasoned approach to copyright enforcement. As it should.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jonathan, if people are interested in finding about you and Plagiarism Today, how would they contact you?
Well, they can find Plagiarism Today is at plagiarismtoday.com, Plagiarism today.com. I know a lot of people have trouble spelling it. It's the worst domain in history. I acknowledge it openly. And also my copyright and plagiarism consulting firm is at Copybyte, COPYBYTE.com. If anyone wants to get a hold of me, the contact forms either location will go right to my inbox, and they can just reach me there.
Okay, well, that's really good. I am going to include both of those links onto ELI's Friends and Allies. Right, you can. I'm going to put it on our Friends and Allies link list, which is slowly growing, and I'm very happy that you've decided to become part of the extended ELI family here. So, anyway, Jonathan, thank you for joining me in this episode, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode so we can talk further.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you, viewers. We will come back with you with another episode. Thank you.